Let me ask you something. If you woke up tomorrow and couldn't remember a single thing about who you were, your name, your job, the people you love, the choices you made, would you still be you? It's a kind of question that sounds like something out of a first year philosophy lecture, the kind you'd nod along to and then forget about the moment you leave the room. But Kamen Rider Build doesn't let you forget about it. It grabs you by the collar and makes you ponder that question for 49 episodes. Releasing all the way in 2017, Kamen Rider Build would be the 32nd entry in the long-running franchise, garnering a wide praise while cultivating a fandom that is still pretty active today. For those unfamiliar, Kamen Rider Build takes place in a version of Japan that has been divided into three separate nations, following a catastrophic event called the Skywall Tragedy. 10 years before the start of the series, humanity was able to launch an expedition to Mars and found a mysterious box they dubbed Pandora's Box. Upon returning to Earth with it, something would trigger the box to activate, leading to massive walls springing up from beneath the ground, separating Japan into three nations: Toto, Sento, and Hokuto. The separation would only cause tensions to rise between each of the nations with their own governments, leading to the threat of war always looming above the heads of the Japanese. At the center of all of this is our main character, Kiryu Sento, a genius physicist struggling with amnesia. The only lead he has to uncovering his past being the traumatic memories of being a human experiment. So he takes on the mantle of Kamen Rider Build, using his powers to take down rogue monsters called the Smash, in hopes it'll eventually lead to him uncovering the truth of who he actually is. Joining him is Banjo Ryuga, a former pro fighter turned fugitive on the run after being framed for a murder he did not commit. Along with Isurugi Misora, a girl with the mysterious ability to purify Smash energy, creating full bottles for Sento to use to transform, the three form an unlikely group sheltered by Misora's father Soichi, while dealing with unresolved questions of who they are and what they are supposed to be, while being wrapped up in a government conspiracy that gives the impression that there are bigger powers at play than simply dealing with the monster of the week. I cannot recommend this series enough. The writing is sharp, the characters are genuinely compelling, it's hilarious a lot of the time, and the action hits in a way that feels satisfying and spectacular. If you're even remotely curious, now is the best time to go check it out because from here on out, I will be spoiling all of Kamen Rider Build. Identity is a theme that runs throughout a lot of media, but Build approaches it in a way that feels weirdly personal. Because almost every major character in the series is dealing with some version of the same crisis. Who am I? Who was I? And what does that mean if those two things aren't the same person? Let's start things off with Sento, because his relationship with identity carries the most thematic weight in the show. The man woke up with nothing, not even a name to go by. He received the name Kiryu Sento and used that as the starting point to build an identity from scratch. From his deep passion of physics, his sarcastic nature, and his desire to protect people, these were all things that just clicked for him. And for a while, that was enough for Sento. His desire to uncover his past acted as motivation for him, not because it was a deep wound for him, but rather, he saw it as a puzzle that needed to be solved. And after searching and searching, he finally uncovers the truth. And it shatters his sense of self. It turns out Sento was a man named Katuragi Takumi, a brilliant scientist who would go through great lengths to carry out his experiments, breaching all sorts of ethics and doing evil things all in the name of scientific progress. Dubbed the Devil Scientist, he was a man who caused a lot of suffering, the exact opposite of the person Sento is now. And watching Sento come to terms with that information is the most genuinely interesting thing the series does because it forces the question, is he Katuragi Takumi? The memories are his, the DNA is his, and the face was his. But the person, that's a lot harder to answer. The Sento we spent all this time with is kind and self-sacrificing to a dangerous fault. He cares about the people around him in a way Katuragi apparently never did. So who then now gets to decide which one is the real him? Build's answer to this is both of them. Not in a wishy-washy way that appeals to both sides, they don't just fuse to become one super Sento. His past doesn't disqualify his present. Katsuragi existed, the things he did happened, and there is no one doing that. Sento doesn't get to pretend otherwise and the series never lets him, but Sento, the person he is now, exists. His growth and change are real, and a person is not simply the worst version of themselves they've ever been. It's the kind of message that sounds simple on paper but hits harder when you watch someone genuinely wrestle with it. And Sento really does struggle with it. There are moments where the weight of Katsuragi's actions nearly break him, where he questions whether he has the right to keep being a hero when the hero's body belongs to someone who did such awful things. But every time he gets close to folding into that self-loathing and spiraling, the people around him, especially Banjo, pull him back. Not by telling him that his past doesn't matter, but by reminding him that who he is now matters too. It's a really beautiful dynamic. Speaking of Banjo, his whole identity crisis runs in the opposite direction. Where Sento has too little past to hold on to, Banjo has one that feels like it's slipping away from him. He enters the story as a man defined by what was done to him, framed for murder, stripped of his freedom, and burning with anger over the injustice of it. His identity at the start of the series is almost entirely reactive. All that matters to him is getting his revenge, a feeling that grows upon the death of his girlfriend. Everything else comes second. But as the series progresses and we learn more about what Banjo actually is, a half-alien with the same powers as the main antagonist, meaning they're cut from the same cloth, things get complicated for him, and it forces him to ask the same question Sento was dealing with. Does knowing where you came from change who you are now? For Banjo, the answer is no. The muscle-brained idiot only struggles with his identity crisis for like half an episode before stubbornly coming to terms with his answer. And that's what makes him such a great contrast to Sento. Where Sento agonizes over his past and what it means for him, Banjo just kind of decides who he is and refuses to let anything dislodge that. He's a little reckless, genuinely kind, insanely loyal, and completely impossible to keep out of trouble, but that's Banjo. It doesn't matter what you tell him about his origins, he will still be Banjo. It's not that he's shallow or that he hasn't processed anything, it's that he's arrived at something Sento is still working towards. Understanding that identity is something you claim, not something that gets handed to you. And then there's Kazumi Sawatari, who represents something Build doesn't explore anywhere else in the cast, what it looks like when someone's identity is not a crisis, but a responsibility. Kazumi is a farmer from Hokuto who ends up fighting on the front lines of a war he didn't start, carrying on his back the lives of the men who follow him, as well as the people back at home who depend on him. Initially presented as an aloof and abrasive guy willing to do anything for Hokuto, that facade quickly disappears when we find out that he's a huge fucking simp for his favorite idol, who just happens to be Misora, showing us a much goofier side to him. But it doesn't take away from the fact that he's the most emotionally grounded character in the series. Where everyone else is asking who they are, Kazumi already knows. He's a leader who carries the pride of Hokuto and the well-being of his followers on his shoulders, always giving off the vibe that he's someone people can rely on. His responsibility doesn't act as some kind of burden for him. He's proud of his past, where he came from and the people he fights for, and never once doubts that. It all serves as the foundation of his identity. And man, this series brutally tests that foundation on several occasions. When his subordinates die, it doesn't break Kazumi's sense of self but changes what that self is carrying. He grieves hard for them, but not once does their death cause him to doubt who he is and the path he's following. If anything, it only helps to strengthen his resolve and lean into his identity further, because that is the only way he knows how to honor the people he's lost, by continuing to be the person they believed in. It's a really powerful way to handle grief in a story about identity. It says that your past, the people who shaped you, the community that made you, can be the thing that keeps you standing when everything else falls apart. It doesn't need to be some kind of weight you're stuck dragging, but something you carry forward on purpose. Kazumi is proof that a settled identity isn't the same as a static one. He grows, joining forces with the people who were initially his enemies, and he doesn't hold it against the ones who took out his friends, and finds genuine connection in a place he never expected. He does all this without ever losing the thread of who he fundamentally is. No matter what happens, he'll still be that Hokuto man always fighting for the people behind him, even when those people are gone. So let me share a bit of a personal anecdote right here. This video was actually one I had planned to release sometime in 2025, but had to shelf it because of Kazumi's death. I was so devastated by his death that I didn't have it in me to finish Build and had to put it off until now. Kazumi was my favorite character, and watching him go out on his own terms, carrying the spirit of his fallen comrades, was such an emotional high. I was left in shambles afterwards. And good thing I did, because the final 2 episodes would have absolutely wrecked me back to back. Hell, even coming back to finish them now for this video got me all emotional. Now, this video would be incomplete if I didn't talk about Gentoku. Starting out as a major antagonist in the first half of the series, he goes through some major changes as the story goes on. Arrogant, politically ruthless, and deeply complicit in the experiments and manipulations that have made everyone's life significantly worse, you'll quickly learn to hate him and at the same time acknowledge his commitment to his conviction. But as the show starts peeling back his layers, you start seeing a man who has spent all his life trying to be what his father and his country needed him to be. He's a misguided person still trying to figure out what he needed for himself, often dismissing his own feelings on matters, claiming that it was all for the greater good of the country. His identity is built around power and the performance of strength, and when both of those get taken away from him, he's left with nothing. But from nothing emerges an absolutely stellar redemption arc. Not because the series lets him off the hook, but because it treats his change as real and hard-won, rather than sudden and convenient. Gentoku earns his place on the side of the good guys through genuine sacrifice, acknowledging the harm he's caused and choosing to be someone different even when it costs him everything. He's the clearest argument the series makes for its central ideas, that who you were before doesn't have the final say on who you are now and who you will be. Before I move on, I just want to add real quick, if you're enjoying this video, why not drop a like? And if you want to see more Kamen Rider content like this, I've already covered a few of them before, which you can find in this playlist that will only grow as I cover more entries in the franchise. So if you don't want to miss out on them, why not be the one to subscribe? Alright, back to the video. Now, no talk about Kamen Rider Build would be complete without talking about its big bad, Evolt. If the heroes of Kamen Rider Build are all learning to understand and embrace their identities, then Evolt is what happens when someone grips their identity so tightly it becomes a weapon. Evolt is an alien, one without a real physical form for most of the show, which means he exists by taking over people's bodies and pretty much spends most of the time living inside Misora's father, Soichi. For years, he wore his face and used his relationships to quietly pull the strings in the background, all to carry out his grand master plan of consuming the earth. What makes Evolt a force to be reckoned with is that the fact that despite taking over people's identities and hopping from body to body, he never once loses his sense of self or changes from their experiences. He has no identity crisis, he's the only one in the entire series who is most certain about who and what he is. Evolt is basically a cosmic entity whose entire purpose is to destroy, and not once does he ever question that. In fact, he genuinely enjoys doing what he's doing. And because he's so settled in that sense of self, he becomes deviously good at exploiting the uncertainty in everyone else. He knows Sento is haunted by Katsuragi, he tries to make Banjo doubt who he is. He knows which of the characters are still figuring out who they're supposed to be, and is always there to twist their uncertainties into something else he can make use of. He's a manipulator in the purest sense, using his surprising charisma to take advantage of everyone he comes across because he understands the specific vulnerability that comes with not knowing yourself, and he never misses an opportunity to slide into that gap. It's a fascinating mirror to hold up against the heroes, because the lesson Build seems to be drawing is that certainty about your identity isn't inherently good. Evolt is proof of what that toxic certainty looks like. A person, or entity in his case, so locked into what they are that growth is literally not a concept they're capable of entertaining. He will never change and doesn't have any desire to, building a cage for himself and calling it freedom. And what defeats him in the end isn't just power, it's the fact that the people he tried to destabilize refused to stay destabilized. Sento figured out how to hold both Katsuragi and himself at the same time. Banjo refused to doubt who he was. And even the MVP, Gentoku, was able to rebuild himself using the strength of the people to change the tide of the final battle. Evolt had bet everything on their uncertainties, looking down on humans and seeing their change as a bad thing, which is what ultimately led to his defeat, succumbing to the ever-changing chaos of growth. Kamen Rider Build never pretends any of this is easy. Figuring out who you are is hard, and reconciling with the person you used to be is even harder. Who you were, who you are now, and who you're choosing to become, all three of those things make up the winning formula that is you. This is a series that wrestles with the idea at every level, from its main character's literal amnesia all the way to its villain's alien certainty, and it comes out the other side with something that feels honest and hopeful in equal measure. But that'll be it for this video. I would love to hear what your thoughts on Kamen Rider Build are like, and if you have any suggestions on what series in the franchise I should cover next, feel free to let me know in the comments below. As always, this has been your very favorite slice of bread. Stay toasty.